colleagues in the room. Is anybody from Farm Credit here? Oh. Are you a loan officer? Okay, so every once in a while I'm going to point to you for instant analysis. Or more. And how I like to describe what I'm going to be talking about is that I'm not going to try to turn you into an accountant. I'm not going to try to make you memorize numbers or anything like that, or ratios or anything complicated. What I'm going to try to communicate to you is what is business-mindedness. How do you think about a business? And some of you are already thinking, okay, I'm retired, I've got an income, and I'm just kind of farming because I really want to do it. Well, even if that's your situation, you need to know how not to bankrupt yourself in retirement. You need to know how much you put into something, into this farm business, and what you expect to get out of it. It's okay to expect not to make money. You just have to know how much money you're not going to make. There's only two choices here in business. You either make money or you lose money. There's no such thing as a nonprofit. A nonprofit only describes a corporate structure that says I'm going to distribute the profits in some other way. It's a mission. FVSC is a nonprofit. So the idea of this is that I'm going to be talking about one specific kind of business, although I encourage questions about lots of other businesses. But the example I'm going to use is a small-scale vegetable business. Later on in the presentation and a handout, just at some point in the future, make sure I can share the handout. I think I'll have it, which you can't have it yet. There'll be a web address that you can go to and download a whole bunch of the stuff that I'll have here. So don't worry about copying things down, because it's all available online. But the example I'm going to be talking about is a small-scale vegetable business, one that sells through a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, sells at farmers markets, and sells direct retail farmers markets too. How many of you are in that kind of business? Selling direct retail. Okay. So we got a few people here that are going to be talking about what they do. For all of the rest of you, this is how you learn about business. You learn how somebody else's business works. It's almost better if you're not doing this business, because you're going to have to understand a whole bunch of stuff. And that's how you get good at being good at your business, is trying to understand the mechanics and the numbers of somebody else's business. If you're in a small town, how many of you consider yourselves in a rural area? All right, almost there. If you're in a rural area and you're in business and you're a veteran, you're probably going to be asked to be a leader in your community at some point or another, if you haven't already. And I just want to put that in this context before we start on all the business stuff, that being a leader means that you plan for the future and you're spending other people's money. And if you're going to be in that kind of position of being on a local school board, on being on a nonprofit board, on being on your FVSC state chapter board, you need to get that idea of how to spend other people's money and set up a plan for that, because that's your legal responsibility to do that. But these business skills, my point is, these business skills aren't just about being good at business. They're about being good in the leadership roles that you're going to be asked to take on, and they're also not so bad for your own personal finance. All right. Oh, everybody else, how many cattle guys? It's Texas, right? What's everybody else do? Goats. Goats. Microgreens. Microgreens. Do you make money?
Yeah.
All right. Think you do it like orchard? Wow. Long term. Hay grass. Anything else? Irrigation. So services for farmers. Cool. Row crops. And we got a couple of row crop guys here. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. So you already started in business. I don't know if anybody ever asked you this when you started, but there's a whole bunch of self-assessment that you have to do. This is not exactly the TAP program, right? This is like, okay, so I decided I want to be farming, but can I do it? And I would say that this bottom one is probably the most important, which is if you get, let's say you go to the farmer's market, you sell $1,000 worth of stuff, great day, and you can't make it without buying something at Tractor Supply. That money just burns a hole in your pocket. You probably ought to think about doing something other than farming. Because farming is all about income at one time of the year. We'll face this way, the calendar, right? You get a whole bunch of expenses in the spring when you go to plant, and in the fall, you have some income at harvest time. Or even if it's a small vegetable business, it's still split up in different times of the year. And that means you have to manage that cash flow. And that's where we're headed, is how do you figure out what to do about making sure that you have enough self-discipline not to spend all the money that comes in cash and spend it right out the other side. My business for 30 years was growing anemones as cut flowers. I know I ought to put a picture in the presentation of what an anemone looks like, but it's pretty basic. Here's what I'm making the screen go. To draw an anemone, you draw a circle like that, and you go like this.
Looks like a daisy.
Looks like a daisy, yeah. Pretty basic. You got it. Really pretty flowers, really expensive. It was great. It was a great way not to have a real job for 30 years. And so a lot of you are thinking, okay, I'm going to be told about business by a flower grower. Well, I also had a few beef cattle too. That's my John Wayne voice. So, been there, done that. I've been in business, had to make a payroll, all of that, and now I work for Farm Credit. As you think about
How'd that work?
as a farmer, I was elected to my local Farm Credit Association Board of Directors. Spent 15 years on that until I was 200 off. Part of that time, I was elected to the National Farm Credit Board.
Okay.
Now I work for the National Farm Credit Board.
Okay, cool.
It was kind of fun. Get to talk to beginning farmers all the time. So you probably already have a definition of success in your head of what you think you want to accomplish. And for a lot of farmers, especially the youngest of them, think in terms of stuff like this. Like, I want 300 acres. I want 300 head of cattle because my neighbor has 200, and I know if I have 300, I'll be able to. Or I want a 300 horsepower tractor. All of that are great goals, but they're not really.
So the more accurate way to think of what you claim as success is not just this. It's not just these kinds of factors, but those are part of it that you can't exclude. If you want a better definition of net profit, as in your earnings, what's left over, what you get to keep, your profit, I think you have to include your family and your goals. Okay, so I was in the flower business. I had income from when I started selling flowers in October all the way through the winter until I stopped growing them in the spring. From mid-May or so to the fall, I had no income. And at some point, your businesses are like that too, where you go outside and you take your pay in sunshine. That's all you get that day is some sunshine. But I like that. And I like the idea of having cattle around. Life is good when you have cattle around. There's a song about that. Look for that on YouTube. May you always have cattle around. If you have cattle, you really need to hear that. May you always have cattle around. So the idea of making net profit is not a bad thing. In my way of thinking, net profit is the ability to do again next year what you want to do. The ability to do again next year what you want to do. If you have a net loss, you're losing money and you have many fewer choices. One of those, like if things go really badly, you lose lots of choices, like you get foreclosed on, you lose the farm. Right? That's what I mean by fewer choices when you don't have the net income. So the idea of being able to make enough money so you can keep doing what you want to do, so you're making your own choices for your own direction, is what I think net profit is. I don't know what your vision of your perfect farm is. You get to make that up. This farm is some friends of mine in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the capital city. I'm kind of proud of that this is the capital of New Hampshire. The Capitol building is about 2 miles that way. But they started out, Chuck and Diane started out in the, working for somebody else in the orchard business. It's a 120-acre orchard also in Concord. And they decided as young farmers, same age as I am, this was back in the previous century when we were all young, they decided they were going to plant about 40 acres of apple trees. That's what's on top of the hill up there. And within 2 years, and they would market them through their employer that had the 120 acres. Everything was going great. They got to share equipment and trade labor, and it was a really cheap way for them to start. Except that 2 years after they started, the wholesale market for apples crashed. The processor went out of business. They had no place to sell the apples. They had to change what they were doing. They had to change their plan immediately and dramatically to be able to do something like what we're looking at now, which is there are blueberries up there and then some raspberries and then some strawberries and vegetables down here. They went from 100% wholesale to 100% retail in 1 year, over one winter, essentially. That's a huge change in plan. Their dream was not what they have, but they demonstrated the ability to plan, to get that first loan to buy the business, and to be able to have, well, what if things go wrong kind of contingencies, so that they didn't really want to do this, but this is where they ended up, and they've made a great life of it that is far better than the wholesale apple business had they stayed in it. My point here is not that everything always goes wrong, but rather you have to be ready to respond so you can make things go right. And making things go right means earning some money while you do it. And also thinking in terms of, well, what do you want to do when you wake up every day? You should kind of plan to be happy. And this is, I do work for a financial institution, and it does sound kind of odd that I'm saying your business plan ought to include happy. But that's why we do it. It's at least part of why we do it. I like cattle. That's why I had cattle. I mean, I didn't make a whole lot of money on cattle. It was break even some years, well, slight loss some years, slight profit other years. But it was what I wanted to do, and that made me happy enough to stick around and do all the work I had to do for the flowers to make real money. You get to tell a business story in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to go through a whole I've got a really short way to talk about a business plan, which I don't think is too intimidating, but it's just to give you the idea of what you need to talk about in a quick business plan. And of course, you have to plan for things going wrong. This is the second most important thing I'm going to tell you this afternoon, and that is that any business out there needs to have these three characteristics, these three functions, I should say. Somebody has to do this. And most people can only do 2 out of the 3. It's a rare person that has the kind of split personality to be able to do all 3 of those functions. And for the most part, those of us in the room who are farming are production people. By production, I mean you get your hands in the dirt, you push the cattle through the chute, you plant the seeds, you fix the hydraulic lines, whatever it is. You're doing stuff. You're making your hands work. You're feeling success. You see that success in front of you at the end of the day. Financial's pretty self-explanatory. Marketing is selling whatever you do. Those 3 functions have to happen in every business. Doesn't matter if it's the hardware store on Main Street or the grocery store down the road or your farm. Those 3 things have to happen. You're all wondering, oh, well, I'm really good at production, right? I know that's going through your mind. And my wife's really good at marketing. Well, who is it that does the financial stuff? That's my question. The accountant. Okay, so if you hire an accountant, good solution. You're right on track. You should have that in your budget. The point here is the financial skill is the easiest one to hire out. If you don't have that skill and you weren't fortunate enough to marry somebody with that skill, I don't know how that splits between you guys. I married well. I married a woman who liked to do the accounting side of things, so that was a great solution for me because I really don't like the financial stuff. That does not motivate me. I have to force myself to do the financial stuff because it's not as fun as, I don't know, pushing cattle through a chute and driving the tractor and all that kind of stuff. So this is the easiest skill to replace that you absolutely have to have. What's your plan for doing that? Around New Hampshire, where I am, I can hire a bookkeeper sort of person for about $20, $25 an hour. And I can take some of you may use the same filing system. It's called the F-150 filing system, where you put everything on a dashboard at the end of the month. You collect it together, you put it in a bag, and you bring it to a bookkeeper, and you say, make sense of this. A Sierra. Okay, so It's like, it's the Microsoft Apple thing, one works, the other works, depends on your personal taste. The idea is that you don't have to do that work, but you have to understand that that work has to be done by somebody. Somebody has to be able to, you don't have to sit down at the computer and do QuickBooks. I'm absolving all of you right now. You don't have to do that. If you want to do it, that's great. If you want to save the $20 an hour, times probably 4 hours, 5 hours a month for a bookkeeper, go ahead, buy QuickBooks. You can save money. You'll get frustrated. Before you buy it, by the way, know where you're going to go to get support. You're from Capital Farm Credit? Northwest Farm Credit. Oh, wow. Well, thank you for being here. You support QuickBooks, don't you? Yeah. So as a Farm Credit Association, sometimes your local Farm Credit Association will actually be the help desk. You can call them up and say, I can't make this program work. How do I fix it? That's what I did. I had QuickBooks at home, and I paid my local Farm Credit Association once a year to fix it after I messed it up all year. But you need to have somebody doing that, because without good records, you can't make good decisions. But I'm absolving you. You don't have to keep those records. It's not your job to produce the records. It's your job to understand the records and be able to make effective decisions based on that information. All right, let's not look at that. Let's look at this one. Now let's look at this one. Okay. For those of you in the back of the room, don't worry about it. This is a one-page business plan. This is just the outline of the questions you have to answer in your mind in order to understand how you are going to make money in your business. There's a mission. You can copy that mission if you want. By the way, this is all downloadable online. Another couple of slides, I give you the address, and it'll be on the handout. But this mission of Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, grow good food, make good money, and be good people. I mean, so you can substitute grow good corn, make good money, and be good people. It's a mission statement. The only thing that is if you think of it as the sign that you would put over the time clock where people punch in. It's like, I'm going to punch in. Oh, that's why I'm here today. My job is to grow good food, make good money, and be good people. That's why I'm here. That's why everybody's at Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, which is my made-up business here that we're going to be talking about. That first column of objectives is all about people. These are people, financial, production, marketing, are 4 of the 5 risk areas that USDA Risk Management Agency identifies for farms. The one that I left off, because the paper wasn't big enough, was legal. For most purposes, covering your legal risks means buy insurance. If you have retail people coming on your property, buy slip and fall insurance. If you have a truck on the road, buy really lots of insurance, because that's your biggest risk. But that's what that means. So the first objective is a people goal, a personnel goal, to achieve an appropriate balance of work and home life. Did I mention you can plan to be happy? I think I said that. So that's the plan to be happy one. The goal, the SMART goal, is to take Sundays off, and I'm going to train Charlie, my guy, who fills in for me, what phone numbers to call, how to fix stuff, all that kind of thing, so I can take a day off. If you don't, this will hit home to a lot of you, if you don't plan to take a day off, you won't take a day off. There's always something to do. I fooled myself into this by taking, if it was going to be a sunny day, and I knew it a couple days in advance, I would declare it a company picnic day, and I would pay for usually in the summertime, we would have 3 or 4 employees and kids, and we would all go to the water slide for a day. And that was my solution, because I couldn't bear to not be working, and I figured if I was bringing my employees along, then I was still at work, right? So somehow it worked for me. But the idea of having objectives, things that you know you're going to do, and then writing down financial, production, marketing goals is the kind of thing you need to put in a business plan. All right, I'm going to absolve you again. You don't really need a business plan. Like this, anyway. And if you did do this is, if you download this online and fill it out, please don't go to your local farm credit lender and say, I want $250,000. Because you would have to do probably 5 sheets like this of personnel, and another 10 of financial, and another 5 of marketing. This is just the cue to get you to think about how to answer that question of what I'm supposed to do. Probably the most important thing on here is that your goals, the actual thing you're going to do, needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, and timed. Timed as in by a certain date, you're going to do that goal. Rewarding as in not necessarily cash, right? Because some of our pay isn't sunshine, but it's something you want to do. And it has to be measurable. And we're going to head in that direction, but do it with numbers instead of words. How many of you sell at farmers markets? Have you seen this? Right? The customer of the kid of the customer that comes in, and it kind of makes your day. I don't know what that is for you in your farm business, but you need to remember what the happy is so that you can make sure that you do it. If you, and I'm sure nobody in here would qualify, well, maybe John would, as the crusty old guy who really doesn't like to talk to people and really ought to stay home, right? You do qualify? Okay. Just want to make sure I had that right. If that's you, don't torture yourself by going to the farmer's market. If you don't want to be around people, if you don't like loud noises, go down the list. Don't go. Don't do it. Don't make yourself unhappy. Find somebody else to do it. Because somebody is going to enjoy that, and you may enjoy it too, but you have to go through a whole lot of stuff to see that every once in a while. All right. Now I'm going to give you the handout. Can you hold that? Jerome, you want to say a few words while you're...
Thanks for coming, everyone.
All right, I think I have enough. I'm going to keep one for myself. Can you help me by passing those out? I showed you the second most important thing. The most important thing is this small box in the bottom here. When you look at it online, that last page I showed you, this is the flip side of that. This is my one page, that was a one-page business plan. This is a one-page financial plan. You don't believe me, do you? This is what you need to know about your business. This is historical for Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. This is what Tyler did last year. This is a mid-sized business in, remember, CSA shares, farmers market sales, farm stand sales. It sells $134,000 worth of stuff every year. This is not the spreadsheet side. When you get this passed out to you, don't look at the small print side. Yeah, thanks. I don't want to scare anybody. This is a formula of how this business runs.
Gary, is this a real example or is this just hypothetical?
This is a hypothetical. It's benchmarked, however. So this is the result of a group of farms that sold between $40,000 and $400,000, like Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, amalgamated together, so it's benchmarked. So this is business performance, real numbers. So if you're one of those folks that isn't in this kind of small-scale vegetable business, this is your set of guardrails. I won't call it a recipe, but I'll say this is your set of guardrails. This is what you need to understand that this kind of business does. And it's a formula. If you look down the left-hand side here, it's sales minus cost of goods sold or variable costs equals gross margin minus overhead equals profit or net margin or net profit. In the financial world, we like to use a lot of different terms that mean essentially the same thing to make sure that you're confused so that you hire bookkeepers. That's why we do that.
That's true.
I only speak the truth. The interesting thing about this, well, interesting to me, and it's going to be interesting to you in a moment, is that besides giving you the numbers of this made-up, amalgamated farm, I'm also giving you the numbers as a percentage of sales. So the total sales for Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes is $134,000. That's 100% of sales. The cost of goods sold, or variable costs, were $80,000. So variable costs are those kind of costs where generally you pay for something in 1 year. It would be the supplies, seed, fertilizer, hired labor, gasoline, I don't know, stuff like that. The things that It's a variable cost because as you grow more tomatoes at Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, you need more of those things. You need more bags to put the tomatoes in, right? So as your production goes up, your variable costs go up. You need more labor, so on and so forth. This gross margin, I'll come back to that in a minute. Subtract from sales minus cost of goods sold is gross margin minus overhead. Overhead or fixed costs are the things, whether you grow 1 tomato or 10 tons of tomatoes, you have to pay for. So think rent. Oh, wait a minute. It's up here in the instructions. Depreciation, interest, repairs, taxes, insurance. Whether you are growing 1 tomato or 10 tons, you have those overhead costs. Overhead for this business that we're in right now, this is overhead, right? That's why it's called overhead. Your barn roof is overhead. In this business, called the Hotel Convention Center business, that's part of the overhead. You notice we're in a fairly nice hotel here. I like this place. It's not exactly the Westin. That would be a higher overhead sort of operation, right? In farming, a low overhead operation means you've got a used pickup truck, right? You have spent less on those things that you're going to pay for probably over years, like your barn or your tractor. And subtracting all of that out is net profit. The reason why we bother to separate variable costs from fixed costs is to know how good you are at what you do. Because that high overhead, low overhead operation thing, you can spend a whole bunch of money on a pickup truck. And it doesn't make you a better farmer, one bit. Maybe make you a cooler farmer, but it doesn't make you a better farmer. What makes you a good farmer and how you communicate that is to know what it cost you to produce the thing that you're selling. If you look at it on the percentage side, what this really says is if I give you 60 cents, if I give Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes 60 cents, he turns it into $1 worth of sales. That's how good he is at this. You need to know how good you are at what you do. That's why you separate overhead costs from variable costs. You could just as easily take this variable and overhead and squish them together and say expenses, right? Sales minus expenses is net profit. But you wouldn't be able to manage your business because you don't know how much you're spending to actually produce the thing that you sell. So you don't really know what to charge for it either, right? I mean, if you go out and buy a new pickup truck, are you supposed to raise the price of tomatoes? I mean, what's going on? What's up with that? You need to know how much you spend to grow those tomatoes. And that's what gross margin is about. When you take that gross margin number, that's taking all the costs for actually growing the crop and putting them into one number called gross margin. You can use that, as we'll see in a minute, for forward budgeting. So let's talk about these percentages. Oh, a full disclosure here. In overhead, I'm counting your salary. I'm going to pay Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, $2,500 a month to run that business because he's worth something. His time is worth something. That's what he gets paid as a salary in this business, and he's overhead because whether he grows 1 tomato or 10 tons of tomato, he has to be there, right, to manage the business. You should consider that you need to get paid something in your business. You're worth something. Even if you're working, a full-time job and you're farming on weekends, what would you have to pay somebody else to do what you do? I know they're not going to do it as well as you do it. But what would you have to pay somebody? And thinking further down the road, at some point you're going to be disabled. Farm businesses are, I think, about 3rd on the list for disability. Over the course of your career, you're going to break an arm or something's going to happen. So at some point, you're actually going to have to pay somebody to do what you do. You kind of ought to figure it in now. So from an accounting standpoint, a CPA would be driven nuts by putting owner's draw or your salary into the overhead line. But I think it makes it more understandable to, yes, David.
For your overhead, you proportionalize that. So say if you have not just tomatoes, but you're doing 60% tomatoes and 40% some other thing.
Yep.
You would say my overhead is I use my pickup truck 60% for that, 40% for that.
So this is the whole tomato business. If you had a beef cattle business, I'd do the same thing over here because it's going to act very differently as far as gross margin and net margin.
But
So
the pickup truck would be distributed across.
It's the overhead is what you would distribute across, because the thing that you want to know is, what does it cost to make the thing that I sell? So you want to keep these costs very close. That's another good reason to separate out the pickup truck. If you have multiple enterprises, you want to make sure that you're spreading that pickup truck across all of them and not loading it up on the tomatoes and expecting them to carry your cattle habit, which is what I did, of course. So these numbers, these are, benchmark numbers for a typical business. This would be like second or third year in business for Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. Growing fast, and he's got a 10% net margin. Is that good? Is 10% net margin good? Net profit. Better than negative. Okay, we've gotten past cynicism. We're into positive. Okay, good. Is that a good net margin? No. Okay, what's a good net margin?
That's your goal. You gotta go back to your goals, right?
Yeah. Well, for a business, 40%. Okay. Just by coincidence, that's our gross margin, which is, we'll come back to that. Let me tell you, this is a really good net margin. Based on the 40 businesses that are amalgamated into this, that are benchmarked, this is a good net margin. This is selling a niche product called local food in small quantities and at a fairly small scale. 10% is a really good net margin. So let's compare it to other food businesses. Just for instance, let's go to the other end of the scale. What do you think the net margin is for a grocery store? 3%. Do I have another bid? 5 or 6? 2%. We're getting closer. 1%. Okay, think about that. You're pushing your shopping cart around the grocery store, and just before you get to the cash register with your exactly $100 in your basket, you run into that big display of pickles at the end cap, and you knock it over, and one of those jars breaks, and it costs $1. That grocery store is not going to make any profit on you, because you just destroyed their profit, because they only make $1 out of $100 in sales. Why on earth would they do that? Why on earth would you be in a business that is only 1% net profit margin? Volume. Okay, we have an alert crowd here. I like that. All right, so you're making money. You just have to sell a whole lot of this stuff in order to make it. So you may have wondered why grocery stores are so big. Average grocery store has between $1.5 million and $2 million worth of inventory. They turn that typically within, most of the inventory is turned within 2 weeks. Right? Everything that's on the shelf is out of there. Some of it, pureed hearts of mushroom or something, that may stay there for a while on the shelf, but most of it is a quick turn, right? Think the produce, right? That's got to get out of there real fast. So they're putting in a big store, big shopping carts. They're going to sell you a lot of stuff because they're in the business, they're in a volume commodity business. Usually when we're talking about agriculture and you say commodity, people think the corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, all that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, they're commodities. But I would say a commodity is more defined by the net profit margin, because grocery stores, being a commodity type business, right? There are lots of them selling the same thing, 1% margin. How about Walmart? I love talking about Walmart. Gets some people's blood boiling, and I just love doing that. They're the sector best performer, right, in retail compared to Kohl's or Target or certainly Sears, which is no longer really selling things. They're just a real estate company. So what do you think Walmart makes as a net profit margin? First of all, before you answer, are they a commodity business? Are there many other producers that are vendors that sell the same thing? Yeah, so it's a commodity business. So what's their net margin? Is it going to be 10%? No. It's actually 3. There's the sector star performer. They do very well. Target and Kohl's and all of them are down closer to 2% or even less sometimes. Sears would be negative. How about Whole Foods? Back to the grocery business. There are about 45,000 grocery stores in the United States. There are about 450 Whole Foods. Does that give you a clue as to whether they're a commodity business or not? Amazon owns it. And actually their profit margin has shrunk since Amazon has bought them. But Give a guess. Think about, is Whole Foods a commodity business or are they a specialty business? Okay, so is their profit margin going to be closer to the 1% average for grocery stores or closer to that? Closer to that, because they're a specialty. It's a niche product, right? So their running average is about 5% net profit margin. That's why Amazon bought them. Since Amazon bought them, their profit margin has gone down because Amazon sells it cheaper in order to get more market share, because their solution is big. So there's all sorts of, this business, the hotel business, average net profit margin over time is around 4%. A white tablecloth restaurant, fancy restaurant you go to, 4%. Pizza parlor, a little high. That's why you see so many pizza parlors. It's a little higher net profit margin. Also because, you've been in this pizza parlor yourselves. Some of them can be really low overhead, right? The chairs that stick to the floor and all that. Right. Low overhead. Saving on cost of goods sold, like soap and floor wash and things like that. So any business that you think of, you can express it in this way. We could do this for Whole Foods or Walmart or anybody. This is how you think about a business. Sales minus cost of goods sold equals gross margin minus overhead equals net margin. I don't want you to raise your hands. If you can't tell me this for your business that you did last year, I would suggest you may be a hobbyist and you're not in business. And that's very insulting, and I understand that. But I'm challenging you that you need to be able to describe your business like this. If you're a leader in your community and people are going to come to you to say, why don't you run for the school board and talk about budgets, millions of dollars in budgets, you have to know how this works. You have to know how a business works. If someone comes to you and says, you know what, Jerome, I've got a great deal for you. I want to go in on the car wash on Main Street with you. And your question, are you ready? Okay, what are your 5 questions you're going to ask me?
How much you want to invest? Oh. What's your sales,
What?
gross margin?
Yeah.
Overhead and profit margin.
Yeah, and if somebody else can't tell you that, they don't know what the hell they're doing. This is how business works. When a loan officer, you are a loan officer. When you go down the street, you're looking, I'm telling you how you think, and I hope you think this way. You're looking at businesses and thinking net margin. What have they got to cover the note that they owe Farm Credit, but also is this place profitable? You have a few ratios in your head, like if it's a dairy farm, I don't know if you do dairy, no. What kind of farm is your typical?
So it's an Ag Vision program. Right now, most of cattle and hay, some veggie farmers, but all in that, mostly less than 5 years of production. So they're just getting into this. Lots of off-farm income too to supplement them being established. So they're aspiring to be here.
And when you drive around, you're thinking, okay, how much could this place possibly sell? I went to, my oldest son was a Farm Credit loan officer for 4 years. He's now an independent farm business consultant. I can't afford him anymore. I was standing outside, I lived in DC for 10 years, up until a couple of years ago. I drove out into Virginia. I was at this beautiful, home center kind of place with landscaping supplies and greenhouses, and I was in the greenhouse business, right? I'm looking at these beautiful greenhouses, facing it, talking on my phone with my son, and I said, this place looks great. I bet they do $15 million in sales per year. And he says, really? You want to know how much they really sell? And I said, yeah. He said, you're standing in front of the door looking at the greenhouse. Yeah. He said, turn around and count the number of spaces in the parking lot. Because that's the kind of metric that you use in retail sales. Okay, you've already, the mall, right? When is the mall full? The mall parking lot full? Christmas. Sunday. Who said Sundays? Wow, you gotta. It's only full once or twice a year, but if the parking spaces aren't there, you can't get the sales. The average agribusiness that's selling direct to retail nursery supplies has got, these numbers are a little old, $26 is the average sale. It happens to the same customer 4 times a year, and they need a parking space. So if you want to know what that business gross is, you say, okay, so count how many parking spaces, and you multiply by, I don't know, whatever it was, $368, something per parking space. It's more than that, $3,600, and that's what they gross. All of this is known. You don't need to know that kind of detail, although it's fascinating to know that stuff. Loan officers know that stuff because when they drive up to your farm, they're looking at it and they're thinking benchmarks in their head. And they know this kind of stuff. And if you're going to communicate with them, you need to know it. Let's think about, I've been on this slide for a long time, haven't I? Let's go to a different slide. How much more time do we have? Does anybody care? Yeah. 45 minutes. All right. Well, let's stay here for just a minute longer. Because everybody wants to know, after you've been in business for 2 or 3 years, and Tyler, by the way, in our imaginary business here, is renting the land because it's low overhead, right? He doesn't go buy a farm and then figure out what to do with it. He rents the land, grows the crop, finds his markets, gets the sales, and then uses his success in selling stuff that he grows to buy the farm. His question now is, can I buy the farm? This is where we use this magic number of gross margin. He wants $30,000 in pay, additional. He knows he's going to have to pay $400,000 for his farm, which is, this is on your handout if you need to look at it, which is $20,000 divided by a 20-year mortgage, $400,000 farm. The Northeast, that's what it costs to buy a farm with a house on it, and land, and probably even a good retail location. So he needs $50,000 in net profit requirements. We're going to estimate his overhead expenses stay exactly the same, which may not be right, but we're just estimating. So he needs $90,000 in additional gross margin. This number has to go from 54 to 90. And because we know 40% gross margin, that's the magic number, we multiply by 40%, and it means that Tyler, in order to buy the farm, has to sell $225,000 worth of stuff. Isn't that cool? That's what your loan officer will do for you if you ask them. But it's not that hard. The math isn't that hard, and now you have it on a piece of paper and you can download it too, because the address is down here, farmbiztrainer.com, and you can download all this stuff, the PowerPoint, and other stuff on there. So if you don't know your gross margin, if you don't know these 5 simple numbers about your business, including your gross margin, it's really hard to budget into the future to answer that essential question: can I buy the farm? Can I afford it? What do I have to do? Now, in real life, can a business like Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes go from $134,000 in sales to $226,000 in 1 year? Is that possible? Yes, it's possible. It is. Happens all the time. This is what beginning farmers do. They amaze the hell out of their loan officers and everybody else. This size and scope and type of business can double about every year. You can't say that about a corn and soybean operation. The overhead costs are massive. Totally different kind of business. This is a low overhead, small business. That's why so many people are doing it. This is opportunity. This doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to make money, but right now, because you're in this room, you know where the guardrails are. You know that if you do this kind of business, you expect this as a % of your sales. There's a great budget for you. Now, where are you going to use that information? This is not a sales pitch for Farm Credit. I'm not telling you how to borrow money, but if you needed to borrow money, Farm Credit or otherwise, wouldn't it be great to go in there, to sit on the other side? What is your name? Jessica. To sit on the other side of the desk from Jessica and say, you know what, my goal here, well, before you get there, my goal here is to sound like a business person, because I know that the lender is a business person. That's how they think. She dreams of spreadsheets at night. That's how this works. So I want to impress Jessica right off the bat by describing my business as a business. So I'm going to give her my elevator speech. This is my 45-second elevator speech. Jessica, I'm so pleased to meet you. Thank you for meeting with me. I'm planning on a business that sells direct-to-retail vegetables at a fairly high margin. I'm going to be doing it through farmers market sales and CSA sales and some farm stand sales. I'm planning to sell about $135,000 worth of sales. My gross margin is going to be about $80,000 in costs, or 60%, which gives me a 40% gross margin, which is pretty healthy. And I'm going to use that gross margin in two ways. I'm going to spend money on overhead, which includes my salary, Jessica, because I do value my time. And also, I'm expecting a net profit margin of $14,000 or so. Okay, that was 43 seconds, actually. I finished a little early. Does that sound businesslike? You could do that if you knew those numbers. All you have to know are those 5 numbers. And you don't have to produce those numbers. You do the F-150 thing, and you bring it to a bookkeeper, and they give you 14 pages of QuickBooks reports, and you say, no. I want it as a 5-line income statement. Tell me these numbers. And you memorize those numbers, because that's what makes your business go. And if you know those numbers, you can talk about those numbers, and even cooler, you can talk about those numbers as a % of sales. And you don't have to tell your neighbors that you sold $134,000 worth of tomatoes, because you're talking percentage of sales. You can compare your business to any other business, and you don't have to reveal what exactly the numbers are. What a great world this is. Okay. Did I mention this was important? Sales minus cost of goods sold is gross margin minus overhead equals net margin or net profit. I'm going to put it on a spreadsheet. That's what this is. You know, spreadsheet, you just compress, right? Remove lines, all that. That's what I did. This is annual results. If I go,
Can I ask a question?
sure.
For the overhead, so my microgreen business, I grow in my house. I have a mortgage that I had before I started my business. Is that considered a part of the overhead, the mortgage?
It's part of the overhead because, for tax purposes, I don't know if you can claim the whole mortgage.
No.
IRS frowns on that. I'm not giving tax advice, but they would frown on that, I think.
Yeah, they do.
It has to be a reasonable nexus to the space that you use and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But you would come up with a number, and I was talking with John in the back earlier today. John, wave your hand. He runs sheep, lots of sheep, in New York State, and we were talking about the cost of fencing because he just put a lot of money into fencing. So when you have a number, like how do I really charge this year's income? Because this is an income statement, right? This is this year only. How do I take an overhead cost and divide it into pieces so that I can charge it against my annual results as an overhead cost? So if you have a 20-year mortgage, it's 1/20th of whatever the mortgage is. Easy, right? If the whole mortgage is for the piece of land. If you have fencing, it's kind of like, I don't know, how long is the fencing going to last? And in the end, you just pick a number. I mean, if we were a Fortune 500 company and you had to have a CPA, audited financials and all that, there's some formula out there. I don't care. Pick a number. Most of this is I shouldn't say it that way. Pretty much none of what I'm telling you is a financial instrument, reporting instrument. This is a management tool. This is for you to run your business. Yes?
On the website, or if you have any other recommendations, are there programs out there that we can utilize a spreadsheet that already has the formulas in place? So, because I haven't used Excel in years, and I don't have the time to reteach myself, and that's a big struggle with that. Okay, here we go.
This is not a plant. She asked that question of her own volition. Thank you for doing that. It's the perfect question. Wait 2 slides. Okay. The idea of a cash flow budget is just dividing our 5-line income statement. Income minus cost of goods sold equals gross margin minus overhead equals net margin. Spreading it out over months, each month, and adding the checkbook or the debit card, however you want to think about it, so that the ending balance of your January statement for your business is the beginning balance of February. This is just dividing your annual results into pieces month by month so that you can actually begin to think about managing it, managing the business. Does that look like a profitable business? Possibly, yeah. It's nice, it's neat. I can't quite see the prices on there, but they're pretty high, I'm sure. Okay, so how many of you have a farmer's market stand that looks very similar to that? Okay, a few of you. What would your sales be from that, John? Daily?
2 weeks ago, it was about
Okay. Is that in the range? 500, 300, 700? Okay, so if you did that 4 times a week and you had 2 crews, you start multiplying, we're getting into some real numbers here, right? And that's how you take something like this, and this is one pile of food, and how many more are in the truck, right? It gets replenished constantly. This is a tough way to make a living in that you have to actually be there. This business, Barrett Hill Farms in New Hampshire, Mason, New Hampshire, uses this as a way to bring customers to their farm stand, which is back home, right? So this is advertising. They make money at this. This farm business, 12 years ago, when I took the picture, was doing $350,000 a year in gross sales and netting $70,000. This is massively profitable. They didn't do anything that they didn't make money at. If they went to farmers markets and they didn't meet their break-even sales goal, which for them I think was it's in the high hundreds, if not $1,000 a day, then they stopped doing it. And they did something different because they knew their numbers and they were managing their business, and they knew that really what they were trying to do with a farm stand, and they went to 4 of these a week, different places, was driving customers, farmers market, was driving customers to their farm stand where they could sell them things like pies for $26 a pie. Oh my God, who would buy that? But people did, and that's where they made money. All right, did I mention this was important? That you need to know this. Sales minus cost of goods sold equals gross margin, minus overhead equals net margin. I hope that you wake up screaming tonight in your hotel room. Get this out of my head, because that's what you need to be with. All right, so we're taking this, now we're small print, we've just taken those annual results. If you could see it, this is what I've been showing you right here. Annual results, total sales minus cost of goods sold, right? So there's 5 green lines here, just chopped it into months. Okay, hold on to your seat if you need to. This is where you're earning your money for that question. We now have the other side of your handout. This is a monthly cash flow budget for Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. It's a made-up business, but this is real, live, proven results. If you want to do this business, you can download this spreadsheet.
I got it, rock tracking.
And put in your own numbers. And I would start with sales. How much do you sell? Are you going to sell it? Well, I don't know. I'm going to go to a farmer's market, and I think I can sell $500. Great, write it down. You're the only one who knows. I don't know. I mean, you can't copy these numbers per se. You kind of have to do a little bit of thinking, but if you have this template, which obviously is a spreadsheet, all the formulas are in there, you don't have to build it, and you spend 8 hours on this, you will have designed yourself a momentous business plan on 1 page. If you were to write, a real business plan like an MBA would, this would be about 85% of your business plan, right here. The rest is a few pictures, a description of marketing conditions, I don't know, a few other things of bullshit, other information. Yes?
There's also
Ag Plan.
really good.
From the University of Minnesota. It's more geared to commodity. It's certainly better at commodity. It's less, a little bit clunkier to use for a very small business. In Ag Plan, you would find this way deep down inside of it. What I'm telling you, as the former farmer here, or soon to be current farmer again, is that I want to have this be the thing that I have in my head as I walk around. I want to be able to follow this information because this is how I manage my business. This creates those specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, and timed goals. It's timed. It's going to happen by month. By the way, why is this per month? To know when you make money, seasonality, right? Now, could you do this by week? Who would do that? What kind of business? Grocery store? No, they would do it by the day. They have stuff that dies if they don't sell it, right? How often does Walmart do this? Constant, instantaneous. When that item gets scanned at the scanner, that information goes to Bentonville, Arkansas, or wherever their data servers are, and that is getting piled up so that by the end of the day, the truck is leaving West Virginia, for all I know, where they have their charcoal supply or whatever that says, you know what, it was a big grilling weekend up in the Northeast, we need more charcoal. Walmart is a logistics company. They just happen to sell stuff. But their skill, their talent, their market sector performance is based on being a logistics company that gets stuff there so that you can buy it before they have paid for it. Okay, and this is your challenge. It does relate to this. Hang on. You go to Walmart, go to the paint section, pick up one of the quart-sized cans of spar varnish or polyurethane or something. It has a date code on the bottom. They're usually understandable. It has the real date you can read. And look at it, and I can almost guarantee you that it's within 45 days of today's date, because they're a logistics company. Walmart makes money because they pay their vendors 60 days, and they have it sold to you in 45 days or less, so that they're selling you stuff that they haven't paid for yet. They put the money in the bank, and then they sell the folks that they bought it from, or pay the folks that they bought it from. What a great business model, right? And it's because they're very efficient at that moving stuff around. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be baby bottles or who knows what it is. Inflatable water toys or that can of paint. That's not your business. Your business is a lot slower roll. You can manage it by the month. But if you look in the top corner there, I can read it. $10,200 in CSA sales in January. Right? That's the subscription. You sell that ahead of time. You're promising somebody, pay me $600 is what each share that Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes sells it for. Give me the money now in January, I'll give you vegetables June through August or June through October, whatever it is. What happens if Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes doesn't sell 10,200? What if they only sell 5,100? Half in January that they're budgeted to sell. What do they have to do in February? Yeah, it's not just that they have to sell more. They have to sell 50% more. They have to sell $15,300. What happens if they don't sell $15,300 in March? What do they have to do? Yeah, what they have to do is start thinking about something other than selling CSA shares, because it ain't working. They got to think about putting on more farmers markets crews. It's management. It's pulling the levers of business because you know what's happening. That's only one number. It's only a sales number, for gosh sakes. But right off the bat, it gives you a measurable goal, specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, and timed goal that you can actually act on. This business, getting information that you're going to make decisions on once a month is great. I mean, you have all your crop decisions and all that. Not trying to cover that up. But these financial decisions, you can probably go month by month. And I know darn well that from June to August, you're not going to look at this at all, right? But if you do the F-150 thing and you collect it, you'll at least have somebody else giving you some fill in these blanks numbers, which, by the way, you can hire that bookkeeper to fill this spreadsheet in. They will do what you tell them. They will complain about it. They will say, theirs are better, blah, 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 blah. Just say, just do it, will you? And they'll do it, and you'll have actionable information. All right. What else did I want to say about that? Oh, that's where you can download it. This is printed on your handout. And at this site, you can download pastured pork, grass-fed beef. I don't think I've put up there the corn and soybeans, which you'd be interested in. And I've done it for potatoes and wheat, courtesy of Northwest Farm Credit. Because when I go out in the world, and usually I have a Farm Credit colleague with me to say, okay, so now you can teach this, because this is all stuff that you already know. It's like, okay, well, what's the business near you? Let's do one of these one-page business plans or one-page cash flow budget for whatever the typical business is for you. And don't worry about benchmarking it, just make it up. Because you know this stuff. You know what these businesses should be doing. If you think about that, again, it doesn't have to be Farm Credit, But a loan officer is kind of a neutral observer of your business. If you bring them a proposal saying, I want to do this, I want to buy a farm, or I want to buy this piece of equipment, and you make the case of it and you do that 45-second speech to verify that you are indeed in business, they're going to listen to you real quick. If you come in with a cash flow budget, here's where I get to ask you the real question. Has any customer ever come to you with a cash flow budget like that, a one-page cash flow budget? Never. Okay, I'm on a roll. This is about 175 different farm credit colleagues I've done this session with, and there are 5 so far who have said, yes, I've had a customer do this. And 3 of those were CPAs that prepared that information. They were multi-million-dollar businesses, and they had one of these. Nobody does this. And I would say, bragging, one of them was a student who had been at one of my sessions and came in and they got the loan. So this is how to do it. But the idea of being able to communicate in the language that the loan officer understands, the numbers, is that you can tell your story about when you're planting and what you're planting, your story of what you want to tell, because you hate these numbers. I know it. You can admit it. It's all right. You can tell your story and just sort of pass it through these numbers. The end numbers are important to you. The numbers tell you when you have to change something, but you don't have to be the accountant to put them there. You need help. You need help doing that. All right. Sure.
Let's say I wanted to go get a loan or whatever. I didn't see something on here like the assets that are already paid off. Is that something that's important to have, like your stuff if you want to go to the bank?
I believe in rewarding good behavior, especially when it helps me out with a presentation. Don't spend it all in one place. The rest of you should be thinking about asking really good questions by now. Just saying. What you're talking about is the balance sheet. What you own, O-W-N, and what you owe. I think it says that on there. Yeah, what you own or control and what you owe. The cash flow budget that I showed you is what you need as, I'm telling you, me, farmer, what I'm telling you as a farmer you need to manage your business and understand it is a cash flow budget. When you go to a loan officer, you're in a different world of numbers that you have to understand what numbers they want to see and what makes them happy. A cash flow budget makes them really happy, but no lender can lend you money without a balance sheet which says, so what are you going to put on the table? What you have, all the assets you have, minus everything you owe everybody else, hopefully is a positive number. For those of you with student debt, sometimes not so much. For those of you with a new pickup truck, do not raise your hand. And you want to be a beginning farmer, I'm sorry for you, you probably are not going to succeed because you have a new pickup truck. You should sell it, get a junky one, and invest the money in your business. All right, I've got that off my chest. What the lender needs to know is your net worth, which is what you are going to put up against this loan. The way lending works is that it's a negotiation. It's always a negotiation. If it isn't, if you feel any pressure, it's not a negotiation, leave. If you feel like you have to do it, leave. Because it's a deal, it's a negotiation between you and the lender, and you're agreeing on this business plan sort of thing. And it doesn't have to be written, it can be the idea. Here's what I'm going to do. I just described Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. I did it in language. I handed you a cash flow budget. Is that enough description for you? Well, with the balance sheet and the income statement, okay. You don't need a big business plan, especially if it's going to be a very small business. The bigger the plan, for the bigger the business, or the more complicated or unusual the business. If you're going to raise crickets, Farm Credit does have cricket loans, I will admit. If you're going to raise, okay, they're for food and for snake food. People food and chocolate-covered crickets. It's a thing somewhere, not me. The odder your business, or the bigger your business plan has to be. If you have good numbers showing a cash flow budget with clear, specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, timed goals, then you're going to be able to walk in with your balance sheet, which tells you what you own and what you owe. Let's look at a picture of one. This is real simple. This is Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes. This is Tyler's, what he's got. He doesn't have much, does he? Right? He's a beginning farmer. He is, he's got the credit card debt. Yep, Christmas was just a few months ago, I guess. He's leasing his land. Remember I told you that? So he doesn't have much. And I bet he doesn't have a new pickup truck because that's not on there. And that's fairly typical for a beginning farmer, is that you don't have much equity. You don't have much net worth. You don't have much left over. Net worth you can call equity. So it's not unusual to have a beginning farmer that's kind of challenged, which is why many farm credit institutions have programs to lend to young beginning small farmers, which includes lower lending standards, which typically means they'll lend you money even though you have less equity than it would take to borrow money for a typical sort of farm. So you were the orchard guy? No, you were the orchard guy. Okay, so orchard. If you want to borrow money for an orchard and start from scratch, you're going to plant and 7 years from now you'll get a crop?
Depends on the type of trees.
That's true.
You have to know that, and then do you already have any in the ground? Are you ahead years on yields? Type of yields are you
So let's say you're starting from scratch, you're going to plant apple trees.
Sure.
So 5 to 7 years before you get any kind of crop, probably 10 years before you're in full production. Okay, so if your balance sheet has to show a lot more equity. You have to have more because you're saying to the lender, you know what, I want to borrow money for a long time and I can't pay you back I can't even start paying you back for 7 years.
about 10,000 acres to put it in the ground.
Right. And generally you don't do that out of your own pocket, but you're probably going to be at 50 or 60% equity, your input into that. So you're going to put in 5,000 or 6,000 so you can borrow 4,000. For growing wheat in western Kansas, where it tends to get dry and it's a sketchy crop. Do we have anybody doing that? That's you. Okay. You have to have more equity because it's riskier. So that's one of those balances of a balance sheet is if you want to do something that's riskier, you have to have more net worth. You have to have more assets that can either be collateral or the cash that you're going to put into that loan. This is what a loan officer needs to know. You need to know this once or twice a year, right? I mean, this is, okay, so everybody celebrates New Year's in their own way. This year, I'd suggest that you get together with your loved ones, your intimate partner, as it were, and do a balance sheet. An end of year balance sheet as part of that growing together and looking into the future and romantic encounter. This is not going well for you, is it? But if you have an end-of-year balance sheet, this one doesn't have a date on it. Balance sheet is this equation at a point in time. If you do it now, and if you started doing this in high school, and every year you do a balance sheet, you're showing the growth of your net worth. This is also called wealth. A lender likes it, and you should kind of like it too if you increase in wealth. It's what we expect to happen over our lives. Doesn't mean you can't give money away, doesn't mean you can't be a nice person, but you ought to know what you have. So if you start doing this before you actually go to get a loan, you have 3 years of balance sheets, let's say, before you go to get a loan, that's going to make your loan officer really happy. There are FFA kids that do this from the time that they're in high school. And they are successful because they get this business-minded thing, taking classes in high school, and they carry it through their lives. I don't care who they're working for or whether they're in ag or not. This is a best practice habit. The other thing, whoa, let's not look at that one. The other thing that a loan officer wants to see is an income statement, which is, remember I've been talking about a 5-line income statement? This is a more complicated income statement. Revenues and sales, income, minus cost of goods sold is gross margin, minus overhead is net margin. This is all squished together and looks something like that. By gosh, those are about the same numbers we saw before. Cost of goods sold, $80,000. So the idea of what a loan officer needs to see as a neutral observer is balance sheet, income statement. Even if you are new and you've never had this in business, make it up, right? That's what that spreadsheet's for. Put your own numbers in, come up with that 5-line income statement, and there it is. And yes?
Are you also doing something similar for the personal side?
Ah,
Because
it's,
a lot of times I think the small business owner might manipulate what the owner's draw is, because they're used to taking whatever profit you can and make that like 10%.
yep. So the question was, so how do you adjust this to your actual personal income? I would suggest, first of all, that you use a Quicken or online a program like Mint.
But are you taking similar statements to the loan officer to say,
Oh yeah,
they pay off my personal?
because they're going to want to see what your off-farm income is.
So
That
you're doing one for your business and one for your personal.
yes, because what you're asking that loan officer for is, I want you to be a long-term partner with me on this business. They're not going to be a long-term partner in your life unless you show up with a diamond ring and, that's a whole different story, right? So what you're doing is saying, I've got a deal for you. Back to that negotiation thing. Here's my deal. This is what I own. This is what I owe. This is what my business is going to perform. This is my history, if you have a history. Here's what I've done in the past. Here are 3 years of income tax returns to show you that I actually followed the law, I paid some income tax, and that's kind of like the stamp of approval of like, these are real numbers. And it would also show any W-2 wage income that you had and verify that. And then you say, okay, so here's my deal, this is what I'm going to do. Are you in? And they may say, you got to be crazy, or we've never done anything like this, or I don't know, well, all the negative things they could say. And your next question should be, so what do I have to do to change your mind? Which is what a lot of people never get to when they're talking with a loan officer, because it's pretty intimidating. It's kind of like there's many things I could compare it to that I won't, because we have a loan officer here. But the idea is, if you are, now that you know the business, the secret of business, try to apply some of that to your personal finances and get that in line, because they will definitely want to see that also. Yeah.
On the overhead with the real estate taxes, I don't know what it's like for other veterans in other states and counties, but we receive a property tax exclusion for being disabled veterans.
Uh-huh.
So we want to know on the overhead, what would the lender like to see in regards to what actually the county has assessed for property taxes, or what we've actually paid for? So I can see how that can help or hurt you maybe when you're filling out that data.
Your overhead, your cost for the taxes, all that kind of thing would show up in your tax return. Typically, if you're deducting now, you don't really have to show your deductions like that.
So we
But
don't have taxable income.
It's helpful to show all your sources of income and all the tax breaks that you get, because it's part of your story. Because a neutral observer, not knowing that you don't pay property taxes, for instance, for a good reason, will not necessarily know that. Or if they probably would know that and be able to say, you know what, you shouldn't be paying property taxes. Let's try to fix that. One of the things about going to a lender, they should actually be trying to convince you to do business with them, right? I mean, you have other choices. It's not like that's your own, that's part of that, it's a negotiation kind of thing. So you should check out other lenders and see how helpful they're going to be, see if they understand the business that you're in. You know, ask them what happens if you have a bad year, and try to interview them, rather than just being kind of a price taker, kind of like, oh, that's the deal, okay. If that's what you feel, then say no and walk away. They'll call you back. They don't want to let you get away without business. Without getting your business. This is my last slide, which I have to put up because so many decisions are made based on your annual credit report, which includes your credit score as one number. This used to be very hard to get information. And now you can, if you have a Discover card, most credit cards now have a little button you can push and you get your credit score. If not, your whole credit report, which is where you can go to get your whole credit report, which is like long. You know, it's every credit card you've got for 7 years, how many on-time payments, all that kind of stuff. The reason to do that before you seek a loan is to know if there's anything bad there. You know, your cousin who has the same middle initial, same name, same middle initial, who is a deadbeat, or that most common reason for bad credit history is medical expenses. And that anesthesiologist who was in there who sent you a $800 bill and you didn't even know they were in the room because you were knocked out, you know, that if you didn't get the bills, then that's a ding on your credit report probably. So thinking through and knowing before you go if you have a bad credit report allows you to say, well, you know, I just found out that it was that $800 medical bill, that's why I have a bad credit report, and you have an explanation for it. Because the larger world of lending, at least for Farm Credit, is that 50% of the loans that Farm Credit makes in a year are done through a process called credit scorecard, which is your credit score and then 5 to 10 other questions, like a credit card application. Do you own or rent? How long have you lived in your home? I don't know, do you get alimony? What are the other ones? That's only 3. Yeah, cash balance, net worth sometimes, and check a box, can we see your credit score? That's the basis for 50% of the loans that Farm Credit makes. If you think about Farm Credit as a business, you have to provide a loan, especially a small loan, at a fairly low cost. And there's not much faster than fill in the little dots on an application and put it in the computer, and in seconds you have an answer back. And those credit scorecards can be up to $750,000 in a loan within the space of a day. That's how credit is done. If you fail out of that, if for some reason you have a bad credit history, you can still go to the loan officer and say, I want a do-over. I want to talk to you because I need to tell you about that anesthesiologist. And it's not like it makes no difference, but you can explain it. And you explain it reasonably. And here's how I've solved the problem, but my credit score is still bad. So it's another way around getting an automated process that just tells you no. You should never accept just no from any lender. It should always be, so what do I need to do to fix this? And it's legally for Farm Credit, we have to tell you within 72 hours in writing because you get a do-over. Got turned down for a loan? You get a do-over. Tell us how to fix it. What else did I want to say about that? I don't know. Somebody ask a question. I'll remember what I wanted to say. Oh, wait a minute. Let me back up. Okay, so that whole net margin thing, remember that of what's a good net margin? I'll use that one. 10% we now know is a good net margin for a small business like this. What do you think Farm Credit's net margin is? Net profit margin? 7%. Any other bidders? 9. We are a specialty business, but we do lend dollars, right? Commodity. 2. All right, 1.5. And the budget is designed to make 1.5% because that's what investors expect. Farm Credit is a series of cooperatives, right? And essentially we go to Wall Street, there's an arm of Farm Credit that borrows money on Wall Street, sells bonds on Wall Street. That's where our money comes from. So actually from a rural development standpoint, we're taking money from Wall Street and bringing it to rural America, which is kind of cool. But that the investors need to see a 1.5% net margin because they figure in the banking business, if you have losses, you can earn your way out of it with a 1.5% net margin, right? If you lose a huge amount of money, then you have to have reserves, right? And you pay for your losses out of reserves. The investor wants to see a business model that has earnings capacity. Farm Credit does not, as a cooperative, doesn't need 1.5% net margin. So each association, each local Farm Credit association is different. I'm a Farm Credit borrower in the Northeast, Farm Credit East, and my association takes that 1.5% net margin and divides it into, I think I can do this. I was a Boy Scout, I ought to be able to do it. Divides it into 3 pieces. One piece is called patronage dividend. It's like, thanks for doing business with us. We didn't have lots of losses this year. You get part of your interest paid back. And right now, my average blended interest for my different loans is pretty close to 5%. So at the end of the year, or the beginning of the next year, I get a check back, which is equivalent to 1% of what I paid in interest. So it knocks my interest rate down to 4%. Thanks for doing business. The other two parts of that 1.5%, 50 basis points or 0.5%, half of that goes to employees. Thanks for doing a good job and not making dumbass loans that caused us to lose money. And the other part goes to retained earnings, which means we have more reserves, therefore we can make more new loans next year. That's what we do with our money, which is kind of cool. What a stock-owned bank would do is take that net margin, whatever it would be, typically higher than that, and distribute it among stockholders. But Farm Credit stockholders are borrowers. So that's where that money goes. All right, I'm sorry, I interrupted 2 questions. Yes, sir.
I just had a question. It was about, so it was labor and overhead expenses. So, I don't know the guy's name, Tim, the tomato man.
Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes.
Tyler, so Tyler's getting 30 grand a year as the owner of the business.
Yep.
Whether or not he's putting any labor in it whatsoever.
No, he's expected to be the manager at this size. So he's...
On the production side, on the variable costs, if
Yeah.
he's doing labor, he's then also getting income, if you will, from labor as well. $15 an hour or whatever.
He's that on the variable cost side, everything up here, you can see labor on here, it's employee labor, it's paid labor. So Tyler is down here in owner's draw as an overhead cost only. All of this labor is, I don't know, the high school girl down the street who's picked strawberries or whatever it is.
Tyler's the labor pool as well. If he's the one actually, you know.
He's only getting a salary. So his salary covers, Tyler, you got to do everything. If somebody else isn't doing it, you got to do it. That's why I count him as overhead.
I just wondered because the variable, it costs on, you can scale up and down your tomatoes, but the fixed cost of his salary doesn't change.
Right. A further implication of this, just for the sake of, I'm going to draw a graph with my finger here. If you take this and you go sales like this, and you get up to about $300,000 in a business like Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes, you hit the point where the biggest cost for Tyler is just what you said, is management. He can't pick any more tomatoes. He can't manage any more people going to farmers markets, and that's the point at which Tyler's Tip Top Tomatoes starts to sell wholesale. Because there's so much less management in selling wholesale than there is selling at a farmer's market. And that's a transition point for a small business like this that is extremely typical, and you should think about as you plan your business and you plan resiliency to be able to sell in more than one market for more than one price. I mean, 10% net margin sounds great, but if you can't manage that, if you can't be there to make it happen, that sale isn't going to happen. So at some point, you run out of steam as that small producer, and your next best market is to sell some of those zucchinis when you have friggin' truckloads of them in the spring or in end of June, wholesale to somebody, rather than trying to do more farmers markets and manage more of the same ball you've already got spinning. So a mixture in your business, a mixture of high profit margin, lower profit margin is entirely appropriate because you're essentially spreading risk. What's the biggest weather risk for this business? Drought? Freezing? Rainy days and Saturday. Always get me down. No, that's Sundays. That's one of the biggest weather risks to this kind of business. You can do it in a high tunnel, you can irrigate, you can solve a whole lot of problems, but you can't fix no customers at the farmer's market. So there's when you understand this, you start to gain a predictive capacity of, so what should I do next? Because you know exactly what it's going to cost you in labor, time, and effort, and management time to add more farmers markets. And you get to that point, you say, you know what? Can't do it anymore. It's like delivering your own stuff, delivering your own eggs, delivering your own CSA boxes. At some point, you just can't do it anymore. You start to look for the office building where you can drop off 150 at a time. Great move. right? That's not where you start. You start like that. Question?
So when you're at the point where you're gonna shift to from doing retail to doing wholesale, should you break your sheet down and say, this is a profit margin from retail, this is a profit margin from wholesale?
You can do that. You can see that you can identify where the income comes from by either the thing you sell or the place you sell it. Or it could be the channel in which you sell it. So I would say for a smaller business like this, that first division in my mind would be wholesale and retail. And just track the retail sales separately, and you're going to be able, if you wanted to, you'd be able to know that you're not going to have all of this extra labor, because and the hardest thing to track in a small business like this is labor cost.
That's a really good management tool, but when you're translating all the way down to the net profit, does it also help the loan manager to see, you're not at 10% anymore because now you're doing 50% wholesale?
Yes, you need to be able to explain that, because that's part of how you manage your business. I'm approaching two very different markets. Here's the success of each market. Yeah, that's part of your story. So if you have to do another whole one of these for the wholesale side of things, sure, go ahead, do it. We are out of time. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I hope that it didn't hurt too much. So go forth and be prosperous.